It probably seems like I say this about almost everything we read, but The Jilting of Granny Weatherall really is one of my favorite stories in English 3. It is a brutally honest and emotional story about a dying woman who has dementia and is confused about which of her children is in the room with her, about what is happening to her. And what makes the story particularly powerful is that the whole thing is told through the woman's own thoughts, from inside of her own head. This story is a great example of a narrative technique called stream of consciousness. It's an extreme example of the tendency of modernist writers to shift from writing about external realities to internal realities. Now, this idea was influenced by the growing field of psychology and by the ideas of people like Sigmund Freud. And the phrase itself was first coined by William James in the quote that you see here. To put it most simply, though, stream of consciousness is about trying to replicate in writing what actually goes on inside of a person's head, following one thought to another, through what at times seems like random connections and memories. The result in this short story is an incredibly intimate and personal portrait of a dying woman. At first, the story can be confusing, but if you can tease out the fragments of memory passing through her mind, you can come out of this with a pretty clear picture of the life that this woman led. Now, a quick warning. Granny Weatherall dies at the end of the story. And in the past, when I've read this in class, I've had students who had to excuse themselves from the room because the story was bringing up very strong emotions about their own loved ones who may have passed recently. And I always tell students, to do whatever they need to do. That I don't mind if they need to leave or take a break from it. But I also think a story like this presents a great opportunity to experience and confront some of those feelings. So I hope that you'll stay with it. So with that warning out of the way, let's get started. Once again, I'll read the story from start to finish, although I will pause periodically to explain some important points as I go. And then after the story is over, I will have a few things to say about it. If you want to hear me read the story, just let the video play continuously. If you want to read it on your own, though, go ahead and stop the video, and you can pick up again when I start my final analysis. And I'll put a timestamp in the description so that you can skip straight to the end. The Jilting of Granny Weatherall by Katerine Anne Porter. She flicked her wrist neatly out of Dr. Harry's pudgy, careful fingers and pulled the sheet up to her chin. The brat ought to be in knee breeches, doctoring around the country with spectacles on his nose. Get along now, take your school books and go. There's nothing wrong with me. All right, I hate to stop so early on, but I just want to make sure that you see what's happening here. We have four sentences here. The first sentence is in third person. It's telling us what is happening in the room. Pretty straightforward. But then immediately it shifts to the thoughts of Granny Weatherall. This is what she is thinking inside of her head. The brat ought to be in knee breeches, doctor on the country with spectacles on his nose. And then this part in quotes, and this can get confusing as we go on the story. I believe for right now, if there's something that's in quotes, that is something that is being said out loud. So I believe that Granny Weatherall literally says this out loud to the doctor. Dr. Harry spread a warm paw, like a cushion, on her forehead, where the forked green vein danced and made her eyelids twitch. Now, now, be a good girl, and we'll have you up in no time. That's no way to speak to a woman nearly 80 years old just because she's down. I'd have you respect your elders, young man. Well, missy, excuse me. Dr. Harry patted her cheek. But I've got to warn you, haven't I? You're a marvel, but you must be careful. You're going to be good and sorry. Don't tell me what I'm going to be. I'm on my feet now, morally speaking. It's Cornelia. I had to go to bed to get rid of her. Her bones felt loose and floated around in her skin, and Dr. Harry floated like a balloon around the foot of the bed. So you see here again, we are seeing this from inside of her head. This is what she's experiencing. Her bones feel loose. To her, it seems like Dr. Harry is floating around like a balloon. He floated and pulled down his waistcoat and swung his glasses on the cord. Well, stay where you are. It certainly can't hurt you. Get along and doctor your sick, said Granny Weatherall. Leave a well woman alone. I'll call for you when I want you. Where were you 40 years ago when I pulled through milk leg and double pneumonia? You weren't even born. Don't let Cornelia lead you on, she shouted, because Dr. Harry appeared to float up to the ceiling and out. I pay my own bills, and I don't throw my money away on nonsense. She meant to wave good-bye, but it was too much trouble. Her eyes closed of themselves. It was like a dark curtain drawn around the bed. The pillow rose and floated under her, pleasant as a hammock in a light wind. She listened to the leaves rustling outside the window. No, somebody was swishing newspapers. No, Cornelia and Dr. Harry were whispering together. She leaped broad awake, thinking they whispered in her ear. She was never like this, never like this. Well, what can we expect? Yes, 80 years old. Well, and what if she was? She still had ears. It was like Cornelia to whisper around doors. She always kept things secret in such a public way. She was always being tactful and kind. Cornelia was dutiful. That was the trouble with her. Dutiful and good. So good and dutiful, said Granny, that I'd like to spank her. She saw herself spanking Cornelia, making a fine job of it. What'd you say, Mother? Granny felt her face tying up in hard knots. Can't a body think I'd like to know? I thought you might want something. I do. I want a lot of things. First off, go away and don't whisper. All right, so hopefully by now you figured out that Cornelia is Granny Weatherall's daughter, her adult daughter, who is taking care of her while she's dying. The doctor has just left the room. She lay and drowsed, hoping in her sleep that the children would keep out and let her rest a minute. It had been a long day. Not that she was tired. It was always pleasant to snatch a minute now and then. There was always so much to be done. Let me see. Tomorrow. Tomorrow was far away, and there was nothing to trouble about. Things were finished somehow when the time came. Thank God, there was always a little margin over for peace. Then a person could spread out the plan of life and tuck in the edges orderly. It was good to have everything clean and folded away, with the hair brushes and tonic bottles sitting straight on the white embroidered linen. The day started without fuss, and the pantry shelves laid out with rows of jelly glasses and brown jugs and white stone china jars with blue whirligigs and words painted on them: coffee, tea, sugar, ginger, cinnamon, allspice, and the bronze clock with the lion on top nicely dusted off. The dust that lion could collect in 24 hours. The box in the attic with all those letters tied up. Well, she'd have to go through that tomorrow. All those letters, George's letters and John's letters and her letters to them both, lying around for the children to find afterwards, made her uneasy. Yes, that would be tomorrow's business. No use to let them know how silly she had been once. All right, so this paragraph, after Cornelia and the doctor have left the room and Granny is left alone with her thoughts, here's where we see really fully that stream of consciousness style that I was talking about. This is all just the things that she's thinking about. Her mind wanders from thinking about like what to do tomorrow and the tonic bottles and the jugs and all these things to clean up and things that she needs to take care of. And most of this stuff isn't really important for the plot of the story necessarily, except at the end of the paragraph, we had mention of some letters. Letters from George, letters from John, and she's anxious about them. She doesn't want the children finding those letters. She doesn't want them to know how silly she was once. So we will find out more later about who George and John are. But this is how this story works. Through these thoughts and memories, we just get little clues, little hints, little pieces that later we can piece together into a full story. While she was rummaging around, she found death in her mind, and it felt clammy and unfamiliar. She had spent so much time preparing for death, there was no need for bringing it up again. Let it take care of itself now. When she was 60, she had felt very old, finished, and went around making farewell trips to see her children and grandchildren. Then she made her will and came down with a long fever. That was all just a notion, like a lot of other things, but it was lucky too, for she had once for all got over the idea of dying for a long time. Now she couldn't be worried. She hoped she had better sense now. Her father had lived to be 102 years old and had drunk a noggin of strong hot toddy on his last birthday. He told the reporters it was his daily habit, and he owed his long life to that. He had made quite a scandal and was very pleased about it. She believed she'd just plagued Cornelia a little. Cornelia! Cornelia! No footsteps, but a sudden hand on her cheek. Bless you, Mother. Where have you been? Here, Mother. You'll notice this is a sign of Granny Weatherall's confusion. She didn't think that Cornelia was in the room with her. She was calling to her. Turns out Cornelia was standing right beside her. This is just a sign of how her mind is going.
Well, Cornelia, I want a noggin of hot toddy.
Are you cold, darling?
I'm chilly, Cornelia. Lying in bed stops the circulation. I must have told you that 1,000 times.
Well, she could just hear Cornelia telling her husband that Mother was getting childish, and they'd have to humor her. The thing that most annoyed her was that Cornelia thought she was deaf, dumb, and blind. Little hasty glances and tiny gestures tossed around her and over her head, saying, "Don't cross her, let her have her way. She's 80 years old," and sitting there as if she lived in a thin glass cage. Sometimes Granny almost made up her mind to pack up and move back to her own house, where nobody could remind her every minute that she was old. "Wait, wait, Cornelia, till your own children whisper behind your back." In her day, she had kept a better house and had got more work done. She wasn't too old yet for Lydia to be driving 80 miles for advice when one of the children jumped the track and Jimmy still dropped in and talked things over. All right, so these people, Lydia and Jimmy, two of her other grown-up children now. "Now, Mammy, you have a good business head. I want to know what you think of this." Old Cornelia couldn't change the furniture around without asking. Little things, little things. They'd been so sweet when they were little. Granny wished the old days were back again, with the children young and everything to be done over. It had been a hard pull, but not too much for her. When she thought of all the food she had cooked, and all the clothes she had cut and sewed, and all the gardens she had made, well, the children showed it. There they were, made out of her, and they couldn't get away from that. Sometimes she wanted to see John again and point to them and say, "Well, I didn't do so badly, did I?" But that would have to wait. That was for tomorrow. She used to think of him as a man, but now all the children were older than their father, and he would be a child beside her if she saw him now. It seemed strange, and there was something wrong in the idea. All right, let me pause right here. So we mentioned of John again. Now we see that John is the father of her children. This is her husband. And we also know that he died some time ago because she says if she saw him, she said she used to think of him as a man, but now all the children were older than their father, and he would be a child beside her if she saw him now. So, in other words, her memory of him is of him as a young man, and her own children now are older than he was when he died, probably, which is why she still sees him as a young man. I love this moment because I think this is really true of the strange way that memory works. When someone dies, their memory is frozen in time and they stay that age forever, even as everyone else grows older. All right, so she's thinking about her husband John. She wants him to see her children and see that they all turned out well. It seemed strange, and there was something wrong in the idea. Why, he couldn't possibly recognize her. She had fenced in 100 acres once, digging the post holes herself and clamping the wires with just a Negro boy to help. That changed a woman. John would be looking for a young woman with the peaked Spanish comb in her hair and the painted fan. Digging post holes changed a woman. Riding country roads in the winter when women had their babies was another thing. Sitting up nights with sick horses and sick Negroes and sick children and hardly ever losing one. John, I hardly ever lost one of them. John would see that in a minute. That would be something he could understand. She wouldn't have to explain anything. All right, so in those thoughts, we found out a little bit more about her. Her husband died when he was very young. She was left to bring up the children and run the farm all by herself. And she feels like that changed her. But also, there's this. So she wants John to see how everyone turned out. She says, "John, I hardly ever lost one of them." And we can infer from that that she did lose one of her children. Most of them turned out fine, but there is one that she lost. It made her feel like rolling up her sleeves and putting the whole place to rights again. No matter if Cornelia was determined to be everywhere at once, there were a great many things left undone on this place. She would start tomorrow and do them. It was good to be strong enough for everything, even if all you made melted and changed and slipped under your hands, that by the time you finished, you almost forgot what you were working for. What was it I set out to do? She asked herself intently, but she could not remember. A fog rose over the valley. She saw it marching across the creek, swallowing the trees and moving up the hill like an army of ghosts. Soon it would be at the near edge of the orchard, and then it was time to go in and light the lamps. "Come in, children. Don't stay out in the night air." All right, so this is kind of a strange image. In her memory, she's seeing this fog rose over the valley. I think there are a couple of possibilities here. There's just my own idea. I think this could be a memory that she had of, some kind of fog coming and calling the children. But I also think this is happening now in the present in her mind. I think that earlier it mentioned that she was having thoughts of death. I think that she is seeing her death coming. I think this is making her anxious, and maybe somehow her mind is taking that thought of death and translating that into a fog moving over her memories of her children. Lighting the lamps had been beautiful. The children huddled up to her and breathed like little calves waiting at the bars in the twilight. Their eyes followed the match and watched the flame rise and settle in a blue curve. Then they moved away from her. The lamp was lit. They didn't have to be scared and hang on to Mother anymore. Never, never, never more. God, for all my life, I thank Thee. Without Thee, my God, I could never have done it. Hail Mary, full of grace. I want you to pick all the fruit this year and see that nothing is wasted. There's always someone who can use it. Don't let good things rot for want of using. You waste life when you waste good food. Don't let things get lost. It's better to lose things. Now, don't let me get to thinking, not when I am tired and taking a little nap before supper. And at that, she falls asleep, wakes up sometime later, we assume. The pillow rose about her shoulders and pressed against her heart, and the memory was being squeezed out of it. Oh, push down the pillow, somebody! It would smother her if she tried to hold it. Such a fresh breeze blowing, and such a green day with no threats in it, but he had not come just the same. What does a woman do when she has put on the white veil and set out the white cake for a man and he doesn't come? She tried to remember. All right, very important point right here. Now, I did not explain the title of the story at the beginning. This story is called The Jilting of Granny Weatherall. And you might not be familiar with that word. Jilting, or to be jilted, means to be left at the altar. If a woman is engaged to get married, but her fiance doesn't show up, which is exactly what happens here. People say that the woman was jilted. So here, for the first time, we're seeing in the story a mention of probably the most painful memory of her life. She was engaged to a man and he stood her up. That's why she says, what does a woman do when she has put on the white veil and set out the white cake for a man and he doesn't come? She tried to remember. No, I swear he never harmed me but in that. He never harmed me but in that. And what if he did? There was the day, but a whirl of dark smoke rose and covered and crept up and over into the bright field where everything was planted so carefully in orderly rows. That was hell. She knew hell when she saw it. For 60 years, she had prayed against remembering him and against losing her soul in the deep pit of hell, and now the two things were mingled in one, and the thought of him was a smoking cloud from hell that moved and crept in her head when she had just got rid of Dr. Harrod, who was trying to rest a minute. Wounded vanity, Ellen, said a sharp voice in the top of her mind. Don't let your wounded vanity get the upper hand of you. Plenty of girls get jilted. You were jilted, weren't you? Then stand up to it. Her eyelids wavered and let in streamers of blue-gray light like tissue paper over her eyes. She must get up and pull the shades down or she'd never sleep. She was in bed again, and the shades were not down. How could that happen? Better turn over, hide from the light. Sleeping in the light gave you nightmares. Mother, how do you feel now? And a stinging wetness on her forehead. But I don't like having my face washed in cold water. All right, so in case you haven't figured it out, the man who jilted her was the George that was mentioned, remember? At the beginning of the story, she was thinking about how she has letters from John and George. Just remember, John was the man that she did end up married to, who she had children with, and who died. George would have been the first man she was engaged to who stood her up. And apparently, from this paragraph, we find out that for 60 years, that has still bothered her. She's never gotten over the fact that George left her at the altar, even though she had this whole life afterward. All right, so we're back in the present now, though, with Cornelia talking to her, asking if she's okay. And she runs through the names of all of her children. Hapsy, George, Lydia, Jimmy, no, Cornelia. And her features were swollen and full of little puddles. They're coming, darling. They'll all be here soon. Go wash your face, child. You look funny. Now, if you look at these names here, we've heard all of these names so far, except for one. George, the man who left, we were just talking about. Lydia and Jimmy, she mentioned earlier, her other adult children. And Cornelia's the one who's with her. Hapsy has not been mentioned before, and you might already be guessing who Hapsy is, but we'll find out more in a little bit. Instead of obeying, Cornelia knelt down and put her head on the pillow. She seemed to be talking, but there was no sound. So this is another sign her mind is getting worse and worse. Now she sees Cornelia's mouth moving, but no sound is coming out. Well, are you tongue-tied? Whose birthday is it? Are you going to give a party? Cornelia's mouth moved urgently in strange shapes. Don't do that. You bother me, daughter. Oh, no, mother. Oh, no. Nonsense. It was strange about children. They disputed your every word. Know what, Cornelia? Here's Dr. Harry. I won't see that boy again. He just left 5 minutes ago. That was this morning, mother. It's night now. Here's the nurse. This is Dr. Harry, Mrs. Weatherall. I never saw you look so young and happy. Ah, I'll never be young again, but I'd be happy if they let me be in peace and get rested. She thought she spoke up loudly, but no one answered. So here, again, there are lots of signs her mind is going. She thought 5 minutes had passed when an entire day had passed. She thinks she's speaking, but no one answers. So at this point, we're not even sure the parts that are in quotation marks if that she's actually saying that or not. Maybe she thinks she's saying it, or maybe she's trying to say it, but her mouth isn't working. The farther we get into the story, the more confused she gets, and the more confused the story becomes. She thought she spoke up loudly, but no one answered. A warm weight on her forehead, a warm bracelet on her wrist, and a breeze went on whispering, trying to tell her something. A shuffle of leaves in the everlasting hand of God. He blew on them, and they danced and rattled. Mother, don't mind, we're going to give you a little hypodermic. Look here, daughter, how do ants get in this bed? I saw sugar ants yesterday. Did you send for Hapsy, too? It was Hapsy she really wanted. She had to go a long way back, through a great many rooms, to find Hapsy standing with a baby on her arm. She seemed to herself to be Hapsy also, and the baby on Hapsy's arm was Hapsy and himself and herself all at once, and there was no surprise in the meeting. Then Hapsy melted from within and turned flimsy and gray gauze, and baby was a gauzy shadow, and Hapsy came up close and said, I thought you'd never come, and looked at her very searchingly and said, you haven't changed a bit. They leaned forward to kiss when Cornelia began whispering from a long way off, oh, is there anything you want to tell me? Is there anything I can do for you? All right, now, this paragraph with Hapsy, the most surreal, trippy paragraph in the story. If you haven't figured it out yet, Hapsy, I assume, is the child who died. I don't know how old she was when she died. Maybe she died as a baby. And I'm really uncertain about this because nothing is made clear here. But we have this really bizarre image where she sees Hapsy standing with a baby on her arm. And she seemed to herself to be Hapsy also, and the baby on Hapsy's arm was Hapsy, and himself and herself. All right, so going back to the ideas that I mentioned earlier, you remember her husband, who died as a young man. There's kind of this weird thing that her memory of him is now younger than her own children, who are grown into full adults now and are older than their father. I think kind of a similar thing is happening here. I think Hapsy died as a baby. And I think that when she sees Hapsy standing with the baby on her arm, Granny, in her confused state, is imagining Hapsy if she had grown up to be an adult, but that's why the woman is Hapsy and the baby is also Hapsy. That's just my theory. I'm not sure if I'm even right about that, but I think Hapsy died as a baby, and this image that she has is just a product of her confused mind. All right, back to the present. Cornelia comes in. Is there anything you want to tell me? Is there anything I can do for you? Yes. She had changed her mind after 60 years and she would like to see George.
I want you to find George. Find him and be sure to tell him I forgot him. I want him to know I had my husband just the same and my children and my house like any other woman. A good house, too, and a good husband that I loved and fine children out of him, better than I hoped for, even. Tell him I was given back everything he took away and more. Oh, no, no, God, no. There was something else. Besides the house and the man and the children, oh, surely they were not all. What was it? Something not given back. Her breath crowded down under her ribs and grew into a monstrous, frightening shape with cutting edges. It bored up into her head, and the agony was unbelievable. Yes, John, get the doctor now. No more talk. My time has come. When this one was born, it should be the last. The last, it should have been born first, for it was the one she had truly wanted. Everything came in good time, nothing left out, left over. She was strong. In 3 days she would be as well as ever, better. A woman needed milk in her to have her full health. Mother, do you hear me? I've been telling you, Mother. Father Connolly's here. I went to Holy Communion only last week. Tell him I'm not so sinful as all that. Father just wants to speak to you. All right, so we know Granny Weatherall is dying, and she is rapidly approaching her final moments. And if you don't know, in the Catholic Church, when someone is dying or near death, they call a priest to come and deliver the last rites, the last rituals that you perform before somebody dies. So that is what Father Connolly is here for. He is going to deliver the last rites because they know it's time for her to die. He could speak as much as he pleased. It was like him to drop in and inquire about her soul as if it were a teething baby and then stay on for a cup of tea and a round of cards and gossip. He always had a funny story of some sort, usually about an Irishman who made his little mistakes and confessed them, and the point lay in some absurd thing he would blurt out in the confessional, showing his struggles between native piety and original sin. Granny felt easy about her soul. Cornelia, where are your manners? Give Father Connolly a chair. She had her secret, comfortable understanding with a few favorite saints who cleared a straight road to God for her, all as surely signed and sealed as the papers for the new 40 acres, forever, heirs and assigns forever. Since the day the wedding cake was not cut, but thrown out and wasted, the whole bottom dropped out of the world, and there she was, blind and sweating, with nothing under her feet, and the walls falling away. His hand caught her under the breast. She had not fallen. There was the freshly polished floor with the green rug on it, just as before. He had cursed like a sailor's parrot and said, I'll kill him for you. Don't lay a hand on him, for my sake. Leave something to God. Now, Ellen, you must believe what I tell you. So there was nothing to worry about anymore, except sometimes in the night one of the children screamed in a nightmare, and they both hustled out, shaking and hunting for the matches and calling, There! Wait a minute! Here we are! John, get the doctor now! Hapsy's time has come. But there was Hapsy standing by the bed in a white cap. Cornelia, tell Hapsy to take off her cap. I can't see her plain. Her eyes opened very wide, and the room stood out like a picture she had seen somewhere, dark colors with the shadows rising towards the ceiling in long angles. The tall black dresser gleamed with nothing on it but John's picture, enlarged from a little one, with John's eyes very black when they should have been blue. You never saw him, so how do you know how he looked? But the man insisted the copy was perfect. He was very rich and handsome for a picture, yes, but it's not my husband. The table by the bed had a linen cover and a candle and a crucifix. The light was blue from Cornelia's silk lampshades. No sort of light at all, just frippery. You had to live 40 years with kerosene lamps to appreciate honest electricity. She felt very strong, and she saw Dr. Harry with a rosy nimbus around him. You look like a saint, Dr. Harry, and I vow that's as near as you'll ever come to it. She's saying something. I heard you, Cornelia. What's all this carrying on? Father Connolly's saying. Cornelia's voice staggered and bumped like a cart in a bad road. It rounded corners and turned back again and arrived nowhere. Granny stepped up in the cart very lightly and reached for the reins, but a man sat beside her, and she knew him by his hands driving the cart. She did not look in his face, for she knew without seeing, but looked instead down the road where the trees leaned over and bowed to each other, and 1,000 birds were singing a mass. She felt like singing too, but she put her hand in the bosom of her dress and pulled out a rosary. And Father Connolly murmured Latin in a very solemn voice and tickled her feet. My God, will you stop that nonsense? I'm a married woman. What if he did run away and leave me to face the priest by myself? I found another a whole world better. I wouldn't have exchanged my husband for anybody except St. Michael himself, and you may tell him that for me with a thank you in the bargain. Light flashed on her closed eyelids, and a deep roaring shook her. Cornelia, is that lightning? I hear thunder. There's going to be a storm. Close all the windows. Call the children in. Mother, where we are, here we are, all of us. Is that you, Hapsy? Oh no, I'm Lydia. We drove as fast as we could, so her other children have now arrived. So Cornelia and Lydia and Jimmy are all there. Their faces drifted above her, drifted away. The rosary fell out of her hands and Lydia put it back. Jimmy tried to help. Their hands fumbled together and Granny closed 2 fingers around Jimmy's thumb. Beads wouldn't do it. It must be something alive. She was so amazed her thoughts ran round and round. So, my dear Lord, this is my death, and I wasn't even thinking about it. My children have come to see me die, but I can't. It's not time. Oh, I always hated surprises. I wanted to give Cornelia the amethyst set. Cornelia, you're to have the amethyst set, but Hapsy's to wear it when she wants. And Dr. Harry, do shut up. Nobody sent for you. Oh, my dear Lord, do wait a minute. I meant to do something about the 40 acres. Jimmy doesn't need it, and Lydia will later on with that worthless husband of hers. I meant to finish the altar cloth and send 6 bottles of wine to Sister Borgia for her dyspepsia. I want to send 6 bottles of wine to Sister Borgia, Father Connolly. Now don't let me forget. Cornelia's voice made short turns and tilted over and crashed. Oh, mother, oh, mother, oh, mother. I'm not going, Cornelia. I'm taken by surprise. I can't go. You'll see Hapsy again. What about her? I thought you'd never come. Granny made a long journey outward, looking for Hapsy. What if I don't find her? What then? Her heart sank down and down. There was no bottom to death. She couldn't come to the end of it. The blue light from Cornelia's lampshade drew into a tiny point in the center of her brain. It flickered and winked like an eye. Quietly it fluttered and dwindled. Granny lay curled down within herself, amazed and watchful, staring at the point of light that was herself. Her body was now only a deeper mass of shadow in an endless darkness, and this darkness would curl around the light and swallow it up. God, give me a sign! For the second time, there was no sign. Again, no bridegroom and the priest in the house. She could not remember any other sorrow because this grief wiped them all away. Oh no, there's nothing more cruel than this. I'll never forgive it. She stretched herself with a deep breath and blew out the light. All right, so you might have noticed that at the end there, the story uses that word. Well, I'm not sure it uses the word jilted. It refers to a jilting again. And so from this, we now know the title of the story, The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, has a double meaning. It refers to when she was left at the altar as a young woman, and now again, at the end of her life, she is jilted. When it says, for the second time, there was no sign. The first time was when her fiance, George, left her at the altar. And the second time, if you look back, remember her last thought before she dies is about seeing Hapsy again. And she's anxious because she's not sure she'll know how to find her. But she wants to see Hapsy in the afterlife and in heaven, I assume, since she's Catholic. And she asks for a sign. And it doesn't say a sign for what. I kind of take it as like she wants a sign that she will get to see Hapsy. Or maybe even a sign that she is going to heaven, that there's going to be an afterlife. I think there's a lot that you can read into it. But whatever it is that she asks for a sign of, she doesn't get one. And that is how she is jilted a second time. She is jilted by God in the end because she makes this clear plea to God
for a sign, and she receives none. So for me, that's what makes this such a sad story. It's not just that she dies, and it's not just that she suffered in her life, but that in the end, in her last moment, she just wants some kind of reassurance, and she doesn't get any. And even though she's surrounded by her family who loves her, it feels like she dies alone. Now, this is a work of fiction, and maybe that isn't what death is like. None of us can really know. I certainly hope that it's not that sad. Um, but if that is what it's like, then I think that might be the saddest thing of all. And I'm sorry I don't have an optimistic spin to put on it. But I think it's a beautiful story, as sad as it is. All right, I promise the next time you hear from me, I'll have something much more pleasant and uplifting for you. But I thank you for watching and listening.